what happens to water at 211 degrees? Well, it gets really hot. What happens at 212 degrees? It boils. And that 1 degree is in the insurance industry, I think, about true domain expertise and truly understanding that very specialized expertise that can help someone get there faster. This is Josh Hollander, CEO of Horton International North America, co-founder of the InsurTech Association, and this is the future of insurance.
Josh, good to sit down with you, and you've had me on your show, so flipping things around a little bit, but it's good to get to pick your brain this time.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
do,
Brian. I
yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, and I want to get into what you do, because in your day job, you're at the forefront of something we've been talking about in this industry for a while and still struggling with, and that's on the talent side, and that's what you live and breathe. So I definitely want to get into that. And you're helping to build something. You're co-founding this thing, the InsurTech Association. Want to hear more about that as well. So it's almost like we're doing two different interviews, but talk to us a little bit about you, first of all, and what you do. And then I want to jump into those two things.
Sure. So, yeah, day job is executive recruiting. We do retained executive search, which I don't want to get into too much jargon, but long story short is, companies will hire us on an exclusive basis to fill a particular role in their organization, typically a senior level role in the C-suite or maybe one or two levels down. Occasionally for organizations that are in fast growth mode, we may help them with team build outs that get a little deeper into the organization. I have a team I run here in the US, but globally, there are about 200 or so people who work under the Horton name. And there are folks stretching from, China, India, Vietnam, et cetera, through Latin America, and a heavy concentration in Europe, as well as a couple of people in the Middle East. Variety of industries that the organization works in. So we are not exclusively dedicated to insurance or InsurTech. But for me personally, I spent about 20 years in financial services and fintech, including some exposure to insurance prior to getting into search. So, it's an area of interest to me, and certainly has increased to be a significant part of my practice and our business here in the US over the last few years.
Well, and I appreciate that. And that's, I mean, frankly, like getting to know you just from being at the different insurance events and kind of on the insurance scene. I know Horton more broadly, so I knew there was a broader focus, but I know like you in particular you've dug into insurance quite a bit, and InsurTech in particular. Given that, and just kind of being a part of the community, what's your take on the talent side? And I'm asking sort of from two sides, right? There's, and this is a big question in the pandemic, is like, is recruiting going to stop? Are people going to put freezes on? It was a mix, right? Like some people did and others were desperate for talent. But do you see a shift or any patterns in the kind of recruitment and the themes, or the sort of profiles of what people are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a big industry with a lot of niches. And so if you're looking at it from an incumbent perspective, it's certainly going to be different than a seed stage or a Series A company. I think that people who can drive innovation, and whether that's externally or internally, remain at a premium. And so, that requires people who understand segments of the industry, that understand technology, that understand how to build products, in a agile, fast growth way. And but how that sort of plays out in the different types of organizations is going to be different. So I think it's the combination of skills that is necessary. I think in terms of some bigger trends, realistically, it is an industry that has a lot of long tenured people. I think a lot of those people are sort of approaching the tail end of their careers. Some of them may have actually extended their careers a bit longer than they anticipated because they wanted to see their organizations get through the pandemic. And just demographically speaking, at least here in the US, Generation X is not as big as the baby boomer generation. And so I think that's going to create in some of the incumbent organizations gaps that need to be filled. And there's a couple ways to do that. One is to have the talent development programs in place to build people internally and potentially skip some people up levels in the organization faster than they might have historically. And then the second is to bring in talent from the outside.
Yeah.
So those are some of the bigger trends. But then, you get into niche things. Like I was talking to a pretty well-known partner at one of the VC firms, and he felt pretty strongly, given the change in the overall financial environment, and how much higher the threshold is for raising capital, that there were certain companies that, because they didn't have a proper CFO in place, or the right CFO in place, that they had probably burned significantly more money and were now in a difficult position that maybe still would be difficult, but might not be as difficult if they had some stronger financial management, financial leadership in the organization. So I think there's some broad trends, and then there's some specific niche things that always are popping up.
Yeah, there's sort of like difficult learning opportunity versus existential threat, and there's been plenty of the existential threats around. Are you seeing anything on the talent side? And I appreciate it probably does depend on, what are we talking about? An InsurTech, a younger company, a more established company, but for example, this morning, and obviously this wouldn't hit your radar anytime soon, but there was saying in the daily briefing, it was saying that enrollment in 2-year community college programs is up significantly in a few specific fields within that. And we've been hearing, certainly as the pandemic hit, this like questioning of higher education and the debt and whether you get the value for it. Are there sort of macro trends in talent, or ways that you see talent thinking about opportunities differently, especially as we've emerged from the pandemic, where I think the nature of work and what it means to balance it all out has shifted?
Sure. So I'll mention a couple things. Maybe the first one is broader than just insurance and InsurTech, which is, I do think fundamentally employees look at the work-life balance a little bit different, and a lot of people were, whether it was their job, whether it was their family, whether it was losing a loved one, a lot of people went through difficult times. And I think that caused a lot of people to reevaluate what their priorities are. I think a lot of people also found that they were able to be productive and manage some family and some life needs more efficiently working from home. I definitely think there are a lot of employees who prefer to be in the office, but there are also a lot of them who don't prefer to be in the office if the other people who they need to collaborate with aren't in the office at the same time, and they end up on, commuting in to just be on a video like this. So, if I were to flip it around and think about it from the employer's perspective, I think there's a couple of things. If you want all your employees in-house and you believe that is the best way to run your business, that's your prerogative. But I think you have to recognize that there are going to be certain people you're just not going to recruit into your organization or retain into your organization if that is your strategy. And that's fine, but you just have to accept that.
Yeah.
The second one I would say is that managing hybrid work, as I alluded to before, is challenging. It's not as simple as saying, hey, we're going to go to 3 days a week. And again, depending on the size of your organization, it is about having the right people in the right place at the right time. And one of the first podcast episodes I recorded was with Phil Reynolds from Brightcore, and I think he's a really interesting, sharp guy. He made the decision to move his company fully remote before the pandemic as his own strategic decision. And one of the things he said is we wasn't to say that there weren't ever in-person activities, but he made it a mandate that no one could make a decision sort of around the water cooler, um, where there might be a subgroup of people taking a decision that they made because that others couldn't get input into
Yeah.
strictly because they weren't there, and that always stuck out to me. And I think more companies need to figure that out. And the bigger the organization, obviously, the more complex it gets. Um, the other thing I was going to mention from more of an insurance or in insurtech point of view is, I think that there is a population of people who might have considered, uh, going to an earlier stage company with a higher risk profile a year ago who won't do that today. And I would say that's, probably in general, but in particular, people who come more from the insurance side or have insurance domain expertise. On the other side, we have a Series A client that we've worked with recently, and they've been able to take advantage of some of the layoffs in big tech, for hiring for product development, for hiring for engineering. And some of those people ended up with, pretty good severance packages and have said, well, you know, this is what I need for a base. I have, some additional cash flow from my severance package. So give me less base and, give me as much equity as you're willing to give me, because I think you guys are onto something and I'd rather
Yeah.
have the wealth creation opportunity than a little bit more income.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that same event or moment can spark a much more risk averse kind of reaction where it's like, look, I've been burned, so now I need to like buckle down. And actually, I saw a bunch of that in 2008 with people who were burned in real estate and related fields that then went into like government jobs. Like the SEC got a lot of ex investment banking people
Yep.
out of the whole implosion that went on there, which is fascinating. But yeah, it's almost like, well, now I've been through it. I have this almost like pot of investment to put in myself that I can take a little bit of risk right now for the, and maybe because they're coming from tech, their tolerance is higher. But it's just fascinating. The exact same action can lead to completely night and day responses in people.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the very simple notion of, buy low and sell high. I think, this company's got some really good investors. They actually were able to raise money,
Yeah,
earlier this year in this environment, but, realistically, it's at a depressed valuation, not a down round or anything like that, but
yeah,
just not the valuation they would have gotten 6 months or a year ago. And if you can, get your options at that level and the company does do well, then you do that
yeah,
much better in the long run, with that equity. So, for those who do have the stomach for it, in some ways now is the best time to join one of these organizations if you believe they, have the right solution and the runway to get there.
yeah. Well, so I sort of switching gears, but maybe pulling on that thread as we talk about startups and innovators in the space. You mentioned the InsurTech Association, co-founder of that. Tell us more about that and who you're building it with, what it's for, and kind of where things are at.
Sure. Yeah, so that's something that evolved over the last year and a half or so. Um, doing the search work that I've done, and then, I've done about 125 episodes of my podcast, and a lot of those episodes are with earlier stage folks. You start to see certain themes. You start to see organizations with similar challenges, leaders with similar challenges, and I guess probably in your subconscious, some of those patterns start processing away. And um, there's a gentleman by the name of Bob Sargent who some of your audience may be familiar with, although he is not one who publicly promotes himself much or goes out on podcasts or other things like that. But a successful guy, has worked in specialty lines for many years, built and sold an MGA, recently co-founded a specialty lines brokerage called eSpecialty. And he's someone I knew from the Hartford area. He's since relocated to Park City, but really knew him totally independent of anything having to do with insurance. And then a couple of years ago, started running into him at a couple of events. We started talking, and he also does some board work, advisory board work, and I think has made some angel investments. So he's seen some of the earlier stage InsurTechs as well from an insider's perspective a bit. And we started chatting, and we noticed some common themes, which are, first of all, building an InsurTech is hard. Second of all, there's been a lot of innovation, but there've been a fair number of false starts. And as we move into the 2.0 or 3.0 phase of InsurTech, are there ways that potentially through a nonprofit organization, a membership organization, we might be able to help some of the early stage founders, vet their ideas, and if the ideas make sense, help them get access to the resources they need to increase their chance of success. So, probably a little long-winded there, but the long and the short of it is that there's a lot of great organizations out there. I know, you've done some different things with David Gritz and InsurTech New York. They do a great job with some things. I ran into you at the InsurTech Hartford Symposium. Stacy's done a nice job building that organization. There's GIA, there's Plug and Play, et cetera. But one of the things that we found is that founders, they tend to struggle with their networking somewhat. So I'm at a pitch night, I'm at a 2-day conference, I'm in a 12-week accelerator. I have people talking at me. Yeah. Who is this person? Is he or she relevant to me? Do they really know what they're talking about? And trying to process that. Or I need investment, I need capacity, I need distribution, I need tech stack. So, let me use the Brell app somewhere and try to book as many meetings as I can. And then, what happens next? So we thought that, again, a nonprofit could sort of fill a gap, connecting early stage founders with these same stakeholder groups, not trying to replace any of these organizations, but maybe tie them together in a different way, and help support the group. Because at this point, InsurTech is a real thing. I think there's going to be transformation that comes for many years, if not decades, to follow, and we're going to need startups to complement the innovation work that's going to happen within incumbent organizations.
Yeah, I do. When you start listing off all of the resources, programs, groups out there, there are a lot. They are fantastic. They help in a lot of ways. And I've also seen a need for a place to turn to figure out how to navigate through it, where to turn, all that sort of stuff. And so it's almost like to have an impartial, and this is why I don't see an overlap with anything, just like all those groups aren't necessarily overlapping because they all have their own kind of little reason for being, or, focus area, to sort through that. And I have those conversations with founders quite often, is like, do we go to this event? Where, like, would this make sense for us to apply to? I saw this accelerator. We don't have time to turn this around. Should we make time for it? And, there's a bunch of us out there that try to help with those things, but we only know what we know, and we don't always have time. So to have some more kind of guiding resource and a peer network, I think, to turn to, and like that kind of bridging network is invaluable. I mean, I've always taken so much from having almost a forum or, group to turn to that's living through it as well.
Yeah. I was sort of find it a little bit humorous when people talk about, well, we're different or this is different, but I actually do think insurance is different.
Yeah.
It is a highly regulated industry. There's a tremendous number of niches. And the reality is that, for most any insurance or risk management product, whether it's, personal lines, commercial, um, specialty lines, whatever it may be, life insurance, to get from a buyer of that product through, um, underwriting it, dealing with claims associated with it, renewing the policy, administering it, you need a lot of handshakes
Yeah.
between people in order for that to happen. And if you don't understand how those handshakes work, if you don't understand, the the different places in a large organization that you need to go, or the niche players that you need to connect with, it's going to be extremely difficult. And so, you know, uh, open networking that, um, first of all, hopefully has all the different stakeholders involved in one way or another, but also can ideally get you to the right person sooner, as you described, is certainly a motivation. And then you mentioned something else, which was big. So we did a couple of pilot events, and one of the pilot events was just about a year ago. And we had 20 founders on a call that was moderated to talk about the current state of fundraising. And we had folks who were in the process of raising, thinking about raising, had just raised, but all early stage still. And I kind of moderated it, but I would call it was more just sort of nudging the conversation along
Yeah.
rather than a heavy moderation. But the opportunity for someone to say, well, I was doing this and then I changed this, and this is the result I got. It was very interesting to sort of witness the willingness of people to share as peers. Um, and I think it can be very lonely when you're running any business,
Yeah.
but certainly, as a founder, um, and with the twists and turns that startup organizations typically go through, um, to have, um, peers you can talk to, because you may not want to talk to your investors, you may not want to talk to your employees about certain things,
Yeah.
you may not want to talk to your customers or business partners about certain things, but to be able to be in a room with someone else who's going through something similar, and just be able to work through some of those things. There's certainly organizations out there that facilitate that, but there isn't necessarily something specific to InsurTech that's doing that. And so
Yeah.
that's another element of what we're trying to do. And I
Yeah.
want to mention one other thing, that it's certainly not just Bob and I. Doug Vermolm, who founded the business Stable, after he stepped away from Stable in the fall, he stepped in as our volunteer executive director. We have a board that, is primarily comprised of founders, um, and some folks like CJ, who started Snapsheet and Rush from Functional Finance, have already had exits and dove back into the industry. So
Yeah.
we've got folks like that. Josh Curry, he recently made a move, but he's been great in kind of giving the investor perspective. So it's many people on a volunteer basis to date who have chipped in to try to help us shape this thing since we launched it in March.
Yeah. Well, so how do we how do we help build this? So for if I'm on the startup side, how do I get involved? How do I become a part of this? If I'm not a startup but could be supportive of this, or even if I am in a startup, what sorts of, it's a nonprofit. So what sorts of resources and support are you looking for from the industry?
Sure. So, I think Doug Vermolm has, started to talk about us as a startup as well. And so, we've done some testing, we found some product market fit in some areas, and we're looking to build on that. So, firstly, you can become a member. We have a variety of membership classes. We call that core group of founders creators, and it's a 199 annual membership, but that's not just for the individual, that's for the whole organization. So there's that group. There's different investor classes. So whether it's a professional investor or an angel investor, if you're just an individual working in a organization as an employee, but are interested, you can join as an individual. So we have that. We do have some sponsors already who have stepped in, which is great. But certainly organizations that have some budget to sponsor beyond membership is helpful. But in terms of the content, and that's one of the things that we also very much are focused on, which is, I don't know if this is the best metaphor, but what I've taken to saying is, what happens to water at 211 degrees? Well, it gets really hot. What happens at 212 degrees? It boils. And that 1 degree is, in the insurance industry, I think about, true domain expertise and truly understanding, maybe not how to navigate the whole industry or how to navigate everything about building an InsurTech startup, but that very specialized expertise that can help someone get there faster, as I was describing before. And so, in addition to having some in-person networking events, we have done seminars. Josh Curry at the Hartford Symposium did a very interesting small group session with about 8 founders who are looking to raise money, and it wasn't a pitch night or anything like that. It was basically like, all right, you got the meeting with me, what are you going to say? And
Right.
digging in and giving very specific feedback, and then promoting conversation amongst the founders in the room as well, and a comfortableness in providing feedback to each other. So we did that. This is the current environment of doing more with less. So we did an online seminar about kind of do-it-yourself PR, and David Gritz has been a very good, I think, growth hacker and doing his own PR in a lot of ways. And so he was on the panel. We had a gentleman who runs Caliber PR, and he understands, like, the people he's talking to there, they're not his clientele. They can't afford him today, but he's willing to share some of his expertise on things people can do on their own to help.
Yeah.
Themselves. So those types of things that where people have domain expertise. So some of the other things, just quickly, again, I've mentioned David a few times, but like, he's got his MGA program, right? Well, that's only going to run once a year, and it's 10 or so companies that will make it into that MGA growth program. So what happens the rest of the year? What can we do? So we've got someone who's interested in providing some mentorship specifically to MGAs. Mm-hmm. Whether that turns into a feeder for David's program remains to be seen. But those are the sort of things that we're working on. We've got someone else who's extremely knowledgeable around distribution, and he's willing to try to stand something up or do a seminar on kind of distribution 101 for people, or the subtleties of insurance distribution. We've got a very prominent guy from one of the VCs who is kind of willing to do a presentation on an overview of the industry and how they think about the industry. So a lot of things like that cooking, but anyone who has that domain expertise, wants to contribute to the network, wants to contribute content, because we have message boards and other things like that. So we're accumulating content to post on those things, or wants to do some mentoring and things like that. We would love to speak with. And
I've got it up on screen if people see me looking away, but it's InsurTechAssociation.org, and you spell InsurTech the right way with no E in the middle. Sorry for the bootleg.
Yes, it's very, you have to decide E, no E. Is there a capital T in the middle?
There's no E. And it looks like your logo's all caps. So you've just avoided the whole like
right.
capital T or not. Josh, I really appreciate you taking the time, not just to be on the show, which was great, but what you're willing to put into helping push the industry ahead. Because there are a lot of things out there, and this sort of unifying place to turn a sense of community or kinship with those who are in the same boat. And I like, having benefited from those kinds of things myself, I think those are actually the most valuable conversations we get to have, is when we're with people who are living in the same spot and you realize, oh, it's not just me. We can help each other. Someone's been through this, or even if they haven't, maybe the questions they're asking me because of that, ignorance or lack of experience gets me to rethink a bit of how I'm looking at it. So there's huge value in that. So I really appreciate what you're building.
Earlier in my career, I was a co-founder of a fintech startup. When I started, there were 4 of us. We raised tens of millions of dollars, had high valuation. .com crash happened, and what was going on in fintech in that was very similar to what's been going on for a lot of insurtechs in this environment. And even if you execute, if public markets are down, then you're going to pay the penalty for that. Or you may have a great idea, but you're dealing with long cycle institutional sales, and are you going to have the runway to close an 18 or 24 month sale? And so I went through a lot of that on the operating side, and so I'm very excited by innovation. I'm an entrepreneur in my business today, and being able to see the great ideas people have, and maybe do a little something that can help more of them be successful and help us promote resilience and sustainability in the industry overall. It's rewarding, and we got a long ways to go with the association, but I think we're off to a good start, and again, would welcome anyone who wants to be a member or contribute in some way.
That's fantastic. Josh, thank you for the time today.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. It was great to be on.
Thank you to Josh for sitting down and spending some time to talk about 2 totally separate things, but also sort of interplaying with each other. The talent side, what's going on the demand side of that, changes, shifts, impacts of not just COVID and rethinking roles in a lot of ways, but also the possibilities from a technology standpoint, and just the dynamic shift in the market between investment changes and different company priorities. It's really interesting on that side, but then also the supply side. What is shifting and what people are looking for, what they're willing to flex on, what they aren't. It's all really telling for where things are heading, and talent is such a big issue for this industry. So I appreciated that. But then changing gears and talking about the InsurTech Association, you can think you bring the people in, but if you don't support them, they don't go anywhere. Where it's the same thing with startups. We can try to get them started, and we've got all these different resources, but how do we help them navigate all that? And putting the pieces of support together is one path to sticking around. Giving a supportive network, talking to people who have been through the same thing, are going through the same thing, or thinking about the same thing as you, unbelievably valuable for startup founders, people leading functions within startups. I've been in that spot. One of our VCs put together a local group where they would host events where you go into your functional group, and I was running sales, and we'd all talk about sales and sales enablement and being more effective, B2B, B2C, what have you. Just taking some of those experiences, inputs, insights is unbelievably helpful. But you layer on top of that the help with navigating the different sources of help out there. I think the ITA is a very much needed thing in this industry, and I encourage people to go check it out. So 2 important things: talent, fostering and supporting our startup environment in this industry, super critical. It's not just a sub piece of fintech, insurtech. is its own thing in its own right and deserves to be. But the only way it gets to be is if we all help it to stand up and to thrive. And so it's just part of how we work. Thanks again to Josh for sitting down. I hope all of you took something from this. And for any startup folks out there, check out the InsurTech Association. I will link to it in the show notes and see what you can do. Become a part of it. Maybe you're further along in your journey. You can be supportive if you're an established player or another part of that InsurTech and insurance ecosystem, and you want to be supportive to this environment, whether it's being a mentor, providing financial support, programming support, etc. There are ways to get involved, so everyone should check that out. Thanks again, and I will see you back next time. Thanks, everyone.